I just want to welcome you, everyone, all protocols observed. Being. So I just want to, before we start, if there's anyone who'd like French translation, to please raise your hand, and somebody will come right to you to give you your headset. French translation? None. Okay. I'll also announce it a little bit later in case there's anyone else. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all distinguished guests, all speakers. Today too, yesterday we focused on climate-proofing African cities. We had a lot of discussions, there were parallel sessions, as well as side events, and we end up at the end of the day with honoring two very important people in our space around urban forestry. So for today, we want to shift the focus a little bit, look at how can urban forests become key drivers for social inclusion, equity, and access. If they are well distributed, if they are well planned, we are able to ensure that everyone has or accrues those benefits that we talked about yesterday. And before I even start, I would like to call upon the first speaker or the first session. I was informed not to announce the speaker because they have their own way of announcing themselves. So with that, this is your cue.
Ata wangena umakhawule gijima insimphethe ezinye umavula kuvaliwe uvela bahleke ngiyahlokoma ngiyaphophoma ngigudluza izintaba ngigudla imifula ngenziwa intokozo yokubona isizwe sase-Afrika sibuthenelana. In the midst of darkness, brightness emerged. Since then, the stars have always been shining. When I say stars, I'm talking about you, African Forum on urban forest. When I say stars, I'm talking about you, my big, beautiful, green African continent, Mama Africa. Halala African Forum on urban forest. Halala, halala African Forum on urban forest. Halala, green horizons shaping the future resilience of the African cities through urban forest. Halala. We are going green. We are going green. May everything that we touch turn into green. 10%, my love is free. Africa, my beginning. Africa, my ending. As we preserve and protect our nature, as we preserve and protect our environment. City, halala, kuleyo ndawo. Ha, I'm talking about the impact of monoculture and the use of indigenous trees to mitigate the climate change. Green, we are turning green. My people, please help me as I start planting the trees all over our African continent. As I start planting, please help me. It's easy, nice and simple. It's just like this. Watitiel hunonkala, watitiel hunonkala, asemlanchen. Watitiel hunonkala, watitiel hunonkala, asemlanchen. Wensangabom hunonkala, wensangabom hunonkala, asemlanchen. Huyo igunonkala, huyo igunonkala, asem. Watitiel hunonkala, watitiel hunonkala, asemlanchen. Watitiel hunonka, watitiel hunonka, asemlanche, uyo igunonka, asemlanche, uyo igunonka. All over my beautiful African continent, Africa my beginning, Africa my ending. Halala African Forum on urban forest. Halala. Huyo igunonkala, huyo igunonkala, yeah, huyo igunonkala, yeah, huyo igunonkala. As I am busy planting all over the continent, I am hearing some sounds from the top of the mountains. And these are the drums. They're going like, go to. What did the hell who know? Go to. Good. 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 Green is the future. Halala! Everything is bright and beautiful. Everything has been blessed. My people, rejoice. Halala!
A big round of applause again. Woo. I think this is the kind of energy I would like the whole day as we go through the sessions. I would like to just give you a quick overview of the day, how it has been planned. We're going to start off, already we've been given a little bit of a gist of what's going to happen today. We are going to start off with some opening remarks, and then we are going to have 2 keynote speakers. After that, we will go into sub-themes that are focused on, different sub-themes around the topic of the day, as well as side event and a very interesting round table that has been set up. We also have poster sessions that will be happening, so keep in mind, I'll be making announcements around this later today. So without further ado, I would like us to set the scene for the day. I'd like to introduce the first speaker, and I'll also try as much as possible on how I'll pronounce her name, Dr. Hardy Robbie Motibi, who is the Executive Director for the City of Johannesburg Health Department. Over to you, Dr. Hadubi, for the opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Program Director. Esteemed guests, colleagues, community leaders, and advocates for change, I would like to acknowledge Contralesa, traditional healers, Lekhoshi Abapedi, and greetings to all. Thank you very much for this opportunity. As we gather here today to address a fundamental truth, health and well-being should not be a privilege for the few, but a right for all. Colleagues, that was the table of contents. I would like to emphasize our objectives for this presentation, which is to promote sustainable urban green spaces, encourage the integration urban forests into city planning, to enforce biodiversity. Also, to improve the quality of life for urban residents. Secondly, we would like to foster knowledge sharing and capacity building. As we all know that as the agents of change, it is our responsibility to facilitate exchange of management between African cities and stakeholders, including the experts. Thirdly, to advocate for policy development and advocacy with the intention to support the creation of policies that recognize the importance of urban forests and also to secure the funding for their preservation, expansion within African urban environment. And lastly, to strengthen community engagements and participation. We need to empower communities to actively participate in urban forests conservation and management, fostering a series of ownership and responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to promote forests, public health. Sorry, just a second. Yeah, we need to promote public health and well-being. As we look around our cities, we see 2 contrasting realities. On one hand, there's thriving parks and large forests offering respite from urban chaos, encouraging physical activity. We need to foster mental clarity and creating spaces for our communities to come together. And not only just spaces, safe spaces, I emphasize. On the other hand, the vast swaths of urban area lack these essential green spaces, with underserved communities often bearing the brunt of this inequity. This is where the question of equitable access becomes crucial. In a void where inequalities in health are pervasive, urban forests can serve as powerful equalizer, ensuring the access to clean air, green spaces, and in life-changing benefits of nature. That can serve the life-changing benefits of nature, which is not determined by the zip code, income level, and social status. Living in urban green neighborhoods would promote physical activity and social interactions between people with profound benefits for public health. The promotion of healthy behavior significantly would reduce the number of non-communicable diseases, and it would make people live longer and also healthier lives. Experimental studies prove that nature stress-reducing impacts and the prevention of depression and other mental disorders. Importantly, the urban forests may buffer socio-economically related health inequities, contributing to longer lives for everyone if the greenery spaces are planned and managed accordingly and correctly. Health and well-being are inextricably tied to the natural environment around us. Urban forests would ensure that we reduce air pollution, lower the heat island effects, and improve cardiovascular health. But their impact goes beyond the physical health. The presence of green spaces has been scientifically shown to reduce stress. And I'm stressing this mainly because the lower rates of depression and anxiety, if they are reduced, they would ensure improvement of our cognitive function. For children, access to nature enhances creativity and also reduces behavioral issues, while for seniors, it improves a safe space for physical activities, social interaction, and also combating isolation and loneliness. In addition to that, we have a remarkably increasing level of obesity in our communities across the globe. So that would also be quite a benefit. We would also like to promote accessibility of these urban forests. Yet, despite these undeniable benefits, too many communities are being left behind. So we cannot talk about health without talking about access. We cannot talk about well-being without ensuring that each and every person, regardless of their socio-economic status or neighborhood, has the same opportunity to experience the life-enhancing benefits of nature. This is a moment for bold action. Urban forests are not just a luxury for affluent neighborhoods. They must be an integral part of every urban planning strategy, woven into fabric of every city. Equitable access means ensuring that green spaces are not confined to select areas, but are distributed across all the communities, especially those that are underserved, and deprived. We must invest in creating safe, accessible, and inclusive green spaces for all. So these spaces must reflect the needs of the diverse populations they serve, whether through walking paths, community gardens, or spaces for recreations and gatherings. To promote public health equity, it is all about dismantling the barriers that prevent access to nature while creating the spaces where people from all walks of life can come together, breathe cleaner air, and experience the joy of being surrounded by the green. And not forgetting people with special needs while we design these spaces. Let us commit to ensuring that these spaces are a vital lifeline to health and well-being. And they should be accessible to all. Let us design cities where every person has a right to connect with nature, to live in an environment that supports their physical health and their social well-being. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, let us ensure that no one is left behind. Importantly, we would like to create recreational needs and address climate change. So urban forests need to respond to citizens' recreational demands while also mitigating part of the large city's carbon debt. An important climate adaptation impact is the cooling of urban temperatures, which directly prevents heat-related illnesses in the city and saves tens of thousands every year, improving quality life years. Equitable access to urban forests is not just about planting trees. It is about planting the seeds for a healthier, more connected, and more inclusive society. Let us work together to create these spaces that nourish every member of our communities, giving them the opportunity to thrive. And I quote from the unknown author. Ladies and gentlemen, the biodiverse environments would lead to improved immune function. As we all know how important it is for us to build up our immunity system in order for us to thrive, urban forests contribute to biodiversity by providing habitats for diverse plants and animal species. By enhancing urban forests and maintaining tree covers, cities can protect biodiversity and support the ecosystem services essential for human well-being. As a direct health co-benefit, contact with diverse environment would improve children's immune system, potentially reducing the prevalence of number of modern illnesses, such as allergies and asthma. We are seeing an escalating incidence and prevalence of asthma and allergies within our communities because our children are living in the confined spaces. They are not being adequately exposed to the fresh air that we are supposed to consume and the normal green environment. In conclusion, urban trees are a multifaceted solution to several changes. By prioritizing the integration into urban planning and policy, cities can create healthier and much more resilient and sustainable environments for current and future generations. Urban greening contributes to health-promoting behaviors, reduces the negative impact of climate change, and stimulates a healthy development of the immune system. And today, we are called to challenge the status quo and to do our business differently. We must ask, how can we design cities where green spaces are not the exceptions, but the rule? How can we ensure that every person, regardless of their circumstances, has the opportunity to enjoy the life-changing benefits of the urban forests? Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Another round of applause, please, to Dr. Mothibi. She has given us this overview of what we mean by that linkage between urban forests and health, but we cannot talk about urban forests and health if we don't integrate them into planning processes, if we don't think about everyone in all social status. But at the same time, she mentioned something powerful. Urban forests can become powerful equalizers. I think that's a very powerful statement that you made today. I'd like to call upon the next two speaker, who's our keynote speaker, first keynote speaker of the day, Ms. Tolula Oni. Ms. Tolula is a clinical officer at the University of Cambridge and a founder and CEO of Urban Better. She will be giving us a keynote presentation on the role of urban forests in reducing health disparities and building climate resilience communities. So we are also linking it with day one. Over to you, Dr. Tolula.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Okay, you can't start the day that way and then have a kind of mellow approach. So I've been tasked to talk about the role of urban forests in reducing health disparities and promoting climate resilience in communities. Now, that's a big ask, isn't it? So I've taken a different approach. I don't quite know what I'm going to be talking about and how related to that, but I think I'm going to instead talk about the approaches, and I think the first speaker really set the scene for why it's important, right? So my talk is going to be in 3 parts, and just a heads up, we're all going to be involved in this, right? So you're not just going to sit down and listen. So in the first part, I'll set the scene a little bit, and hopefully bring in a slightly different dimension from what's been talked about over the last day. In the second part, I will go into a little bit more detail about the how-to, so approaches to getting health, to thinking about health in the context of urban forests. And in the third part, we'll talk about calls to action. Okay, are you ready? Okay, good. Thank you. I have to make sure, because you're my co-presenters here. Okay, so part 1, setting the scene. You know, we're here talking about urban forests, just taking a little bit of a step back. You know, we're talking about in the context of the continent. Why is this so critical? You know, why is it so critical to think about cities and think about ways of greening cities? Now, I think it's important to highlight the pace of urbanization that we're facing on the continent, right? Just for context, if you look at the pace of urbanization across Europe and North America, the urban population increased by just under 500 million in 200 years. So that was the pace of urbanization. On this continent, we're increasing by 1 billion in 60 years. 500 million in 200 years, 1 billion in 60 years. So that is the force of urbanization that we're confronting with. So that's one aspect to think about. And it's important to recognize that because this is unprecedented. And so the approaches that we take have to be unprecedented and have to really be radical and out of the box in our imagination of what is possible in our context. Because we can't afford to just take this incremental, let's see how we go, because it's just happening too quickly, right? The second context I want to highlight is our demographics. What is the median age on our continent? I hear a number. 24? Higher or lower? Lower. Who's got a lower number? 18? Okay. It's around 19.5, right? Okay. We have over 70% of the population under 30. Who identifies here as being under 30? Who is deluded in their disconnect between... Okay, we'll talk about that. I'll come on to that in calls to action, right? Because when we talk about inclusion and representation, it's, we're already doing a lot better. Okay. And then the third aspect that brings these things together, let's just go back to that for a moment. The reason why that's so critical is when we're talking about health, we're talking about a very young population. So my background is medicine. So I came at urban health from recognizing that, when we talk about health, we often talk about healthcare. But these are not the same things, right? Healthcare is part of health. And on a continent that has a very young population, why are we not saying, we have limited constraints in terms of our resources, but luckily we have a very young population. So how can we look at ways of keeping our young population healthy for as long as possible so that our healthcare costs are down? Because we cannot afford the deluge of the burden of disease that we're actually driving. So an example is from South Africa, not my research, but research by colleagues from years ago that showed that if we took the people within the clinic, so people who are already diagnosed with cardiometabolic diseases, so be that diabetes, heart disease. So these are people already diagnosed. We know there's people undiagnosed. If we took those people and we ensured they were optimally treated, we would use up all of the healthcare budget for just that set of conditions. So we need to break out of the fallacy that the health sector we need to do a lot more in terms of our healthcare system, strengthening and resourcing, but we need to break out of the fallacy that the healthcare sector is what's responsible solely for the health of the population. Because we will not grow, there's no reality where we can grow fast enough to address that budget of the burden of disease that we're pushing, right? We have to turn that tap off. We have to treat people with existing conditions better, but we also have to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. Now, we talk about the fact that, and the World Health Organization says that, we know that over 80% of factors that influence health lie outside of healthcare. And then we say, what should we do about health? Healthcare. Okay, great. But what about the other 80%? They lie in the environments. They lie in the public space where people live, where people work, where people play, where people connect. And this is outside of the healthcare space. And so for me, this is how I got into urban health. Because working in a clinic, so I was working in Cape Town for over a decade, and seeing patients coming in day out, and you realizing that, okay, firstly, I'm giving them advice that they cannot take, right? I'm saying, you need to walk more. And then they say, and I feel good because I've given like awesome advice, like high five. And then they say, because they just give me my tablet so I can go. I've been here since 6 a.m. But in reality, the environment outside, they don't have the green spaces to be physically active. It's not safe. The air quality is poor. So how can you actually give that kind of advice? You know, it's at best it's nonsense, and at worst it's actually irresponsible, because those environments could potentially make health even worse. Now, the last aspect of setting the scene is the opportunity. Because the great thing about urbanizing so quickly and being at this pace of urbanization, and by the way, we're not just talking about the mega cities here. So I was born in Lagos. I'm not just talking about Lagos, and and I love the fact that there's so many different types of cities here. I was talking to colleagues from Bamenda this morning. So it's the urbanizing pace, right? And it's the urbanizing processes. A lot of that is happening now. And in fact, over 2/3 of the urban infrastructure investments that will be made on this continent over the next 3 decades are yet to be made. And so the opportunity to think differently and to actually lay the groundwork for healthier public spaces is high. Really high. I get very frustrated when I go to my cities and I see a whole new part of the city that has just been developed, like over the last 5 years, and every time it rains, it's flooded, and the air quality is bad, and I try to go for a walk, and they've not. I'm like, we just built this, and we heard from Dr. Kadarobi earlier. We know what we need when we think about people-centered public spaces in terms of spaces to be physically active, not just for leisure, but as part of your day-to-day commute. We know the impact of green space. We know the impact not just for health, but for climate resilience in terms of heat protection, in terms of flooding risk protection. And yet we're just building. But here's the thing. Health doesn't trickle down from good intentions. And I say that because we often conflate development as good, right? So we'll just build, and we need this, and we need this, and people will get healthier. It doesn't trickle down. We need to be intentional about it. So my next phase, intention, right? So what is our approach? Part 2. Now, 4 things. I'm going to need people to remind me. So can you remind me of co-benefits? Avoiding my eye. Can you remind me of calculate? Can you remind me of, what's that word? Co-create, right? You see me? Okay. There's one more word. You see, this is why I need your help. And can you remind me competency? Okay, what's my first word? Co-benefits. Now, because of the pace of urbanization, we cannot afford to think about greening. We cannot afford to think about urban forestry as, okay, let's do green. We cannot afford interventions that are not at least double duty, maybe even triple duty, right? And following the logic of health doesn't trickle down from good intentions, I would argue that planting trees does not necessarily improve health. Because we have to ask the question of how you're doing it, and why you're doing it, and where you're doing it, in order for it to improve health. If you're planting trees where the burden of disease isn't, and then you go back 10 years later, it's like, oh, people are not healthier. It's like, well, you didn't plant it where the burden of disease, where people actually needed that access, right? if you don't plant it in ways to think, well, what else could the trees do? What are the needs of the population, right? And how can we think about planting and urban forestry in ways that is not just increasing green space, but potentially, can this increase green space and support food security? Can this increase green space whilst thinking about employment and livelihoods? Can this increase green space whilst, more familiarly, thinking about climate resilience? If we're not asking the questions, we don't design the interventions to give us the outcome that we're looking for. So there was some research done as part of the Lancet Pathfinders Commission that looked at ways to get health co-benefits through climate mitigation action. Right? So what is the existing evidence on the best bang for our buck, for want of a better phrasing, to achieve health co-benefits through climate mitigation? And there were 3 key pathways that were found. That if we act on interventions that improve air quality, on interventions that support physical activity, and on interventions that support that think about food systems and land use. If we have interventions that address those, we can achieve health through health and climate co-benefits. Now you can see how urban forestry can help us as an entry point do those 3. But we'd have to be asking, how can our particular intervention improve air quality? Because then you have to ask, where is air quality worst in our city? Do we know that? Right? How can it improve physical activities? Like, what are the ways people are moving for work, for transport or for leisure? And how can we improve that? So the co-benefits bit was really asking the questions first on what are the needs, right? And what are the opportunities for achieving these co-benefits? Thank you for that. Who was the second person? Calculate. Follow-on point. We cannot change what we don't measure. And the point I wanted to make with the calculate, by the way, I just needed 4 C's. That's why I was calculating. Measure would be better. But we have to measure the health impact. Remember what I said, that health doesn't trickle down from good intentions. If we've said, okay, we've planted trees and it makes people healthier and it's improved air quality, really? Have you checked? Did it? We have to calculate, right? So we have to think about what we're measuring, and that measurement has to come in before. So from the study, from when we're designing the intervention, and so we know what we're measuring and we know the kind of timelines of when we expect to anticipate the outcomes. What's the third point? Co-create, thank you. When we're thinking about measurement, who is deciding what we measure and what matters? Who has decided what the intervention is to start off with? And I just want to highlight there the importance of understanding that lived environment and understanding that when we're thinking about, okay, we want to green up the city, how are we developing that intervention? When we talk about the impact that we're wanting to assess, who is deciding what that impact is? Who is involved in measurement? Right? So really important co-creation across every step of the way, really critical. And the last point? What was the last one? Competencies. Thank you. Linking to that, we talked about, and the previous speaker also mentioned, things that we need to do. But really critical to that, whether that is for a researcher or an advocate or a decision maker, policy maker, what are the competencies that are needed to help us achieve this, to achieve these approaches, to help us think about co-benefits, and that's kind of systems approaches, to help us think about what we calculate. That's quantitative, that's qualitative methods, to help us think about co-creation. So from my perspective, for example, there's 2 things that I've realized are really critical. One is kind of knowledge co-production methods. We often talk in the research space about pathways to impact. Every single research study has achieving impact, right? And we say things have to be co-created, etc. But we don't actually train our students, we don't actually train, whether that is in urban planning or whatever, on how do you co-create with communities. This is not magic. This is not about just your personality. There are methods to do this, right? How do we ensure those competencies are there? How do we ensure we have the competencies of integrating health, of measuring environments, etc.? So that's the last that's point. So remember those 4 C's. I'll end with this, my calls to action. Say a word for me. Aspire. Say conspire. Say inspire. Very quickly, 3 calls to action. Aspire. We need to be thinking bigger. The reason I painted the picture around the urgency, the pace of urbanization, is often we're thinking about, there's this narrative of catastrophizing, of all the things that we cannot do, and all the things that are not possible. But what choice do we have? The cost of inaction, if I take air pollution, which is some of the work that I do, when you look at the kinds of action that needs to be done, people say, oh no, we can't afford to do it because we have to do X, Y, Z. Can we afford not to? When in a city like Lagos in 2018, in 1 year, the state of Lagos lost 3% of its GDP due to air pollution. Why it's so important to calculate, right? Half of the deaths from air pollution in 1 year were under 5s. Can we afford not to act? So when we think about what needs to happen, how can we aspire for healthier cities? And the opportunity is there because we're laying the groundwork now. Where if we think about the digging analogy of trees, we're actually laying the groundwork for how our cities are growing now. But we need to be aspiring differently. What was the other word? Conspire. This needs different types of people to come together, right? I prefer conspire to community. I have co-conspirers, it's because we have to do things differently. And often in these spaces, there's many people, naysayers, right? This is not possible. You can't do it. But within every scenario, I always push back when people say, government won't be able to do. Who is this one government? Government there's not one thing. There's always somebody in there that you can conspire with. There's always someone in there who is trying to do something. Find that person and conspire with them. So we need atypical ways and atypical partnerships. One of the things that we've done with Urban Better, which is my approach, and I'm going to put a little plug for a session at 4:30 in this room later, is we've looked at how to bring different people together, to how to drive a youth-led movement that is using data to inform advocacy, right? Come at 4:30 if you want to. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to calculate. We're going to measure air quality. This is an air quality monitor. We're going to measure air quality. We're going to measure the green space around this area, and we're going to have a conversation about how to democratize our process of generating data using physical activity to inform our recommendations. And inspire really is that. Really critical part of inspiring is when we think about awareness raising, it's not just here, it's not just how people are making people aware, but actually data and evidence is a really critical part of that. So I will end because Joy is in the corner, but I really think it's critical. So I've taken a slightly tangential approach to thinking about bringing in health because I think it's really important that everyone here leaves knowing that they are a health professional, right? You're a health professional, right? Because what you do creates more health than in the healthcare setting, yeah? You're a health professional. You're a health professional. And I hope those 4 C's have kind of given you a sense of an approach to thinking about how we can work together to aspire, to inspire, and to conspire for healthier, climate-resilient communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tolu, what a great, strong foundation for the discussions today. I think really stark statistics. Infrastructure that is meant to be built, 50% of it has not been built. We have a very young generation. How can we leverage these young generations to come? How can we conspire as we are doing here? And I'm hoping that people who are online are also sharing this information, because we want to conspire with everyone when it comes to these interlinkages. 80% of health issues are outside the health sector. How can we work on an integrated approach? Thank you very much, Tolu. I'd like to call the next keynote speaker. His name is Dr. Msinzi. Apologies. Dr. Msinzi Mieza, who's the CEO of the Council for the Built Environment. Big round of applause.
Sanbonan. Dumelang. Nimacheron. Abshin. Huyamore. Am I missing someone? ¿Cómo estás? Okay. No. Program Director, thank you very much. I just want to confirm that I'm not here to conspire. I hope that I'll inspire you. And also, I want to acknowledge the presence of the senior leadership from the city, ED, Babu Medru. We come way back. I also saw Mtobeli. He will know where the passion came from. Babu Mayor from my city of Umhlatuze. I come from Richards Bay, so for those who might not know. So thank you very much for gracing our occasion. I just want to maybe use the first 5 minutes just to give a perspective on how I find myself standing here. When I moved to Joburg in 2000 to study at Wits Town Planning, I stayed at Braamfontein Center on the 10th floor. So I come from a village, Gwasagamteto. Then I moved to Gwambonambi at some point. So that's my background. Now you come from a village, Gwasagamteto. You're now living on the 10th floor in Braamfontein Center. On weekends, what do you do? At home on weekends, you'll go and herd cattle, do things that boys do. Now you're living in an urban setting. So I discovered a park opposite Metro Center. It's just outside the theater in Joburg. I used to visit that park on weekends, but that park became unsafe before it was privatized, given to a private entity around the city center to look after it. That's why it's fenced now. Before it was not fenced. So at that time, Joburg, I'm sure Baba Masondo would have shared the experience of Joburg yesterday. At that time, Joburg was going through an evolution. So when we were supposed to do our 4th year dissertations, I then reflected on my experience in the city, on how I interacted with the city. So I decided to pursue an urban design course focusing on public spaces, on how public spaces had been used as a tool to express transformation of the city. Because there were a number of public spaces at the time that were being developed. Your Thokoza Park, your Mary Fitzgerald Square, your inner city parks, Banato Park, and others. And in Joburg at that time, they had announced 100,000 trees in 5 years. Oh, sorry. So that really framed my thinking around. Okay, thank you. That framed my thinking around public space interaction as a town planner. Then fast forward to that, I think in between that period, I was interacting with the work around public spaces and parks. When I fortunately joined Joburg, I remember Masondo explaining the rationale why Thokoza Park was designed, or built by the city. He shared a story that was very fundamental. He said when he got married, he had to go to Florida Park to take pictures because there was no park in Soweto. And then I realized that in actual fact, we undermine the role of these spaces play, because I come from a village, so I had no issue with public spaces until I moved into the city. Then I moved into Tshwane, where I work with Ntobeli. In Tshwane, there was a program, because we had actually appreciated that there was a problem with the public space and access. We came up with programs, Adopt a Park, 2 parks per ward. Ntobeli led that program. I'm sure if you want to know what happened to it, he'll share the experiences or how actually that program was an intervention to try and transform townships in the city of Tshwane. So when I got a passion to do my PhD 18 years later, I then thought, let me do a reflective storyline and then follow the passion around public spaces. So that's really how I got myself into the space. So I'm not saying I've been a scholar, but I've been involved in the process and the development and evolution of public spaces, at least in 2 cities, in Joburg and Tshwane. Now, let me do what I was asked to do. So, Prof. earlier spoke about knowledge production. And I think for me, the story that I have relayed to you, it's about my experience. It's about what I observed. It's what I reflected on, and then influences what I do. So there are other things that you bring into the equation, such as creativity, innovation, and yourself on the work that we do. I was watching a series the other day. Professor Allen is a botanist or ecologist. So he was having a conversation with one of his students. So I'm just going to go through this. I'm not going to read everything. Basically, his argument was, we must discuss and observe how things evolve. So the slide is shared, so I'm sure colleagues can access it. Because if we don't do that, we're impacting ourselves in terms of thinking capacity. I'm paraphrasing, so you can read if you can. Because if you don't do that, we'll rely on peer-reviewed papers where people think about the same thing and then said, we peer-reviewed this exercise, all of us agree that this is a cogent argument, you are correct. So I'm not taking a step in research. But I think we also need to take into account issues. I think someone spoke about indigenous knowledge, on how we tap into that. I think the ED. And I think what he's arguing, which I agree with him, is that if we don't do that, we deprive ourselves an opportunity to learn from outsiders. So I speak to different audience about different aspects of the work that we do. One of the observations I've learned, we tend to close ourselves. So if I speak to QS or quantity surveyors, so who are you to come and speak to us? And I always say to them, someone who came up with the bulb is not the same person who invented the candle. So knowledge evolves. So we must embrace outsiders in the spaces that we operate in. So the slide I'm going to go through now are really related to what Ayanda asked me to come and speak about. And I think because some of the stuff has been covered, so I'm going to just go through them quickly. I think this is a statement wherein colleagues appreciate that cities are evolving and are changing. In my small city, Mayor, you'll appreciate the growth that you're seeing happening in Richards Bay. And I think that will continue to happen. But when you talk about public spaces, there is history from a planning perspective on why we do what we do. The idea of tranquility, romanticism that emerged in countries like Britain and UK, and how spaces were acquired to drive public spaces, develop public spaces, like your Central Park in New York and other places. So that's really where the idea comes from. But contradict that with our cultural a relationship with spaces. In Tswana, they will say Khotla, where they will have traditional meetings. In my space, Sibaya, which is not green, but these are spaces that we interact with. And our urban setting should reflect such aspirations as well. These are some of the theories that actually in the urban planning space started working around public spaces. So there's always someone who's called the father in any other academic discipline. So we relate to Olmsted as one of the fathers because he spearheaded the development of parks in different cities in the world. The idea of planning with nature, I think it's what influenced how the parks at the time developed. I think for me, it's about understanding that we live with nature, we're part of nature. It's lungs of the city. Different cities around 2000 developed what we call Metropolitan open space systems because there was an understanding that if you don't preserve public spaces, you might have challenges. These places were seen as urban safety valves. They provide communities with places of refuge. And I think that's what the ED was speaking about. So I'm paraphrasing what she spoke about. But South Africa is a special case. So I just want to take a step and watch this image. These images, I got them online, so let me not accredit the photographers. But the point I wanted to make with these images was to demonstrate what we're dealing with in urban planning and how do you create spaces that we spoke about where we convince people to buy into our ideas. So some of the places I'm sure you'll go to. So if you live in Alexandra, how do you create spaces that Prof spoke about that enables communities to run away from refuge and be healthy? How do you deal with issues of safety? If you're in Cape Town, you drive into Cape Town, that's what you bump into. So, but in villages, it's different context altogether. That's where I'm from. And these images are really demonstrating the challenge that confront. These are recent images. So you can go to Diepsloot, you can go to Hammanskraal. This is what you'll see. And the democratization of spaces and provision of spaces, if you compare older suburbs and newer suburbs and informal settlements around, you'll see what Prof was speaking about, just not recently. I think she could have done a better job than I would in terms of migration and impact on what we're grappling with as a country as well. So what then becomes the role of town planners or urban designers is to acknowledge all of these problems that afflict, to say how do we then use our technical abilities to respond to the challenges that I've showed you. Because I think if we don't do anything, I think the challenge will continue, issues of health would compound, and I think the issue of access and justice should be considered. There was a case currently that is unfolding in Cape Town, Tafelberg case, where communities in Cape Town have argued for access to that piece of land in the inner city because they feel it's well located. Obviously, matter is in court, but you can follow the argument that they're putting forward. And I think for me, it's about access that we must actually deal with. So what have we done to address spatial injustices of the past? So look at these pictures and carefully. So why can't we then build one unit and one tree, at least as a minimum? Because most of these development, some of them I'm sure they've changed, but if you go to newly developed houses in anywhere in the country, this is the image you see. So surely if you build one unit, you can partner with other players to plant a tree. It can be a fruit tree, whatever tree. At least over 10 years, the picture will change. The president has called for us to rethink on how we design places and spaces that people live in. And I do agree that it's a right call. We need to be experiential on what we do, learn from the historical past, and ensure that the knowledge that we use to develop spaces and places is derived from communities. I mean, in a city like Joburg, we've got different communities now are living in. The issue of language, for example. So when we do public participation, how do we do it? So those are issues that we need to take into account. And how do we design cities? Because these things are not new. So take lessons from history on how other cities have been able to evolve over time. Have a dream about what these cities should look like, taking into account theories. I'm speaking like from a planning point of view. How do we not just put spatial plans that make sense to enable development, but don't address the issues that the ED was raising? Modern cities must address what I encountered when I moved to Joburg. This was me when I didn't know where to go first week. Because you'll stand in the balcony, then you stay in your room, you go to class, you come back. And if you go to Hillbrook today or Sunnyside or anywhere in the inner city, this is what communities do, because these places have been hijacked, they're not safe. So the issue of safety is, go to Peter Ross here in downtown, you'll be experiencing issues of mugging and other issues that are social ills. I'm going to skip this slide because I think it's more about hardcore town planning language. But the next one, I think it's more important before the program director, as she moved towards intimidating me, I need protection. These are some of the principles that we need to adopt moving forward. And the point I'm really arguing for is that these things have been done by the city of Joburg, and I think we can do much more better. Issue of accessibility, Prof. spoke about it, how accessible these spaces are at all times and how safe they are. How do we manage differences? When you design these public spaces, you must accept that 17% or 70% of our population is younger people. So for me, if you want to go to a park, I want to read a book. These youngsters want to play soccer. They want to play games. How do you create spaces that are inclusive? And these are contestations that you experience in cities. And how do you ensure that you listen to different voices that might not be in terms of the orthodox, what Olmsted would have envisioned about what a park should look like, because parks have changed. Because these are wicked problems that we're dealing with. I've showed you the pictures of South African perspective. Really, the point that I'm arguing is that we must ensure that we advocate for right to cities and spaces. I'm making some proposals that can be considered by the team, especially from an urban planning point of view, based on the storyline that I've told you. I do argue that we need to ensure that we infuse knowledge, indigenous knowledge, with our planning ideologies. We also humanize public spaces. If there is any slide that I want you to remember as part of my presentation, is this one, to say how do we change it? And how do we ensure that moving forward we don't design spaces like this, wherein we think about public spaces and afterthought, but it forms part of the agenda of developing cities and towns. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. Yes. Now we see how we can start off from a planning process all the way to ensuring equity for the purposes of health. We are seeing that those pictures made me very sad. Because one thing is not only the public spaces. If you want to access a health facility, it feels like you have to take a drive and I don't know where you're going. So there's a lot of inequalities when you see such kind of planning processes. There are good theories that are out there. Why are we not putting that into practice? And I really like what Olmsted says, public spaces are the lungs of the city. I would like to thank you very much for that. Before we go into our tea break, I have a few announcements to make. First of all, we will be having our parallel sessions. As of now, you have known how to navigate the areas. The 4 parallel sessions will be displayed on the screen. Please feel free to move around the sessions and also engage in the discussions. The first announcement I would like to make is regarding the poster sessions. If you are doing a poster session, please hand over the poster sessions to the organizers during tea break, and then you at 4 o'clock meet at the reception with the organizers so that they are able to plan and set you up. The second announcement I'd like to make is, if you're attending the site tours, we would really like to make sure that you are in the right bus. So please go and sign up during tea break so that you don't go to the wrong site event. We'd also like to know from the room who will be attending the cocktail dinner tonight. So by show of hands, someone will be counting around. So by show of hands, if you are going to be attending the cocktail dinner, I'm already seeing 2 people. Yes. Please keep your hands so that there's a quick count. Did you get? Those ones who are not sure, half in, half out, please raise your... Yes, I like the energy for the cocktail. We're good. We would also like to take a very quick picture. I think the breakaway rooms are not showing on the screen. If the AV can fix that, I can see them, but they're not on the screen. We would like to take a group picture before we move. So please, if those ones who are behind can move a little bit closer so that we take a quick picture before we go for the tea break. And I believe that's it in terms of my announcements. Please come closer. We want to show our future generations that we were in the second forum of urban forests in Johannesburg. Yes. Yes, it's for everyone. This is for everyone. So they come closer. No, here. So the ones who are behind at the back. Yes? They said this health and the safety issues. Yes. Huh? Where? Okay, okay. You want? Yes. Please, because... Welcome, welcome everybody. I would like us to start the afternoon session in the interest of time. So for those ones who can hear me, those ones who are outside, please join in. The ones who are on the aisle, please take a seat. We would like to start the next segment of the session. Wait. Yes. Okay. Okay, so before we start, we have 2 main announcements. One is that we have not received enough signatories for the site visits tomorrow. I know that the city is taking care of us with all the food, but when you have time, please go to the reception and sign up for the site visits tomorrow so that you are allocated the right bus. And for the second announcement, I'll give it to Mike. Over to you.
Must call me. Hello.
Sorry, the day started on Tuesday.
Tomorrow is Thursday, Sisi.
Thank you.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I have one announcement to make regarding the arrangements on Friday in Diepsloot. And I'll be very blunt and to the point. Colleagues, nothing has changed in the program for Diepsloot. We are all supposed to be at Diepsloot at the times that we have arranged in our planning meetings and as it stands on the program. So everybody who is a worker is supposed to be at his post at the times that was agreed. So there is no truth in saying that this Diepsloot has changed. No change. So colleagues, let's do it. We are already midway through this magnificent occasion. So we are not going to leave it at this and listen to untested and unconfirmed rumors. So we are all on track. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. So, as it's clear, the agenda stands on day 4. I'll use day 4 because there has been some miscommunication. Please use the program that has been given to you before, getting into the wrong program. Before we start, yesterday we had a fantastic party. We were honoring 2 important people, Amos Masondo, as well as the late Professor Wangari Maathai. We didn't have the opportunity to showcase the video, so we'd like to take this opportunity to showcase the video before we can go into the round table. So over to Evie.
Well, the story behind that is about this huge being consumed by the fire. All the animals in the forest and they are transfixed as they watch the forest burning. And they feel very overwhelmed, very powerless, except this little hummingbird. It says, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flies to the nearest stream, takes a drop of water, and it puts it on the fire and goes up and down, up and down, up and down, as fast as it can. In the meantime, all the other animals, much bigger animals, like the elephant with a big trunk, could bring much more water. They are standing there helpless, and they are saying to the hummingbird, what do you think you can do? You're too little. This fire is too big. Your wings are too little. And you're big, so small, you can only bring a small drop of water at a time. But as they continue to discourage it, it turns to them without wasting any time and tells them, I am doing the best I can. And that, to me, is what all of us should do. We should always feel like a hummingbird. I may feel insignificant, but I certainly don't want to be like the animals watching as the planet goes down the drain. I will be a hummingbird. I will do the best I can.
The work of addressing issues of an environment is a huge challenge that requires collaboration and working together across the various classes, stratas, and indeed the mobilization of all resources available, be they located in government, the private sector, and indeed the entire civil society. My message basically would be that we should seek greater collaboration. We should mobilize and organize and leverage various resources to build a better future. Better future for Africa, a better future for South Africa, a better future for the world, indeed a better future for our children and future generations. Indeed, when all is said and done, everything really centers on a better life and the building of viable and sustainable economies. Agriculture is one area that requires such special attention, and the various professions available to young people today through a variety of technicons and universities or other institutions of higher learning remains critical. So I would say that young people in particular need to pay attention to the work that needs to be done to leverage resources and to ensure greenery and greening. And this can take place at the level of institutions. For instance, imagine what would happen if all our churches, if all our mosques, if all our temples had trees, planted trees, grassing overall, and if indeed our young people were to use and redirect their energies towards transforming the environment and then ensuring that there's an overall positive impact on the environment through a variety of creative implementation of a variety of ideas to take us from where we are to a successful and indeed great greenery of the future. Institutions in Joburg, such as the Johannesburg Zoo, can do their bit by linking these issues of greening to overall sustainable development. Regarding the African continent, I remain positive. In the main, because there's some good work that is being done in relation to reinforcing tourism and seeking to promote and deepen work in relation to animals, the forests, and generally greenery across the African continent. And these challenges do not just apply to those countries which enjoy the privilege of better climate and related circumstances, but it also applies to those countries in the Sahel, Namibian desert, stretching to the Karoo in South Africa, and parts of Botswana. So I would say that I remain fairly positive that this work that is being undertaken in the cities in Africa and elsewhere really relates to a very firm foundation that already exists and that has been laid. All we need to do is to build upon the achievements and work in such a way that there's greater collaboration to ensure better impact.
Fantastic, fantastic. We are hoping that all this will be uploaded into the website so that we can always reflect on the videos. We would like to go very quickly into the next segment, which is a critical discussion. It's a roundtable discussion on sacred grounds, common future, environmental justice, inequalities in access, and legacy effects of colonial and apartheid era. The discussions will be around how historical patterns have actually shaped the disparities that are currently happening in terms of access to green spaces. But our panelists will give us some of the solutions that we can look into in terms of reducing these disparities and what are some of the potential areas that we can leverage on. So with that, I would like to call the moderator, Dr. Jessica Thorne, from the University of Namibia and Imperial College London, who will be moderating this round table. Jessica, I will allow you to call in your panelist for the round table. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so there you go. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a wonderful day and a half, and I'm really enjoying interacting with all of you. So today, what we're going to be doing, I'd like to introduce some of our colleagues. We have colleagues from all across the continent, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from South Africa, and of course from Tunisia. And we have a combination of activists and government officials, as well as traditional healers and artists. So I think it's going to be a really interesting session. So first, I'd like to call up. We have Natasha Malunga from Zimbabwe. Natasha, please come up and take your seat. Natasha comes from the House of Arts Association. She works with the creative industry, and she aims to ensure that youth and women are working for sustainable growth in terms of entrepreneurship, looking at issues around community engagement, using film and art. The second person we have is Ms. Ikhat Kai from Tunisia. There you are. She's a lawyer, also has a consultancy called Bamboo Consultancy. She's been involved in a lot of the COP27 and various other initiatives. She works across the MENA region around democratizing governance and decision-making, participatory decision-making. She's part of the Arab Institute of Governance, and she works on one project which is in 12 cities looking at marginalized neighborhoods. Then we have Ms. Regina Apondo from Kenya. Please come up, Regina. Regina, sorry. Regina comes from the Konke Design Initiative, embracing informality in African cities. And she's focusing on social justice, capacity building, advocacy, and networking. And then we have Mr. Makgapela Taba from the city of Johannesburg, thank you, who's working on building strong and collaborative city community partnerships. He's currently working on his PhD. We're looking at alternative methods, which is really interesting, to burial. And he works around how we develop responsible governance, coordinating regional service delivery, building strong accountability and partnerships. And then we have Gogo Sebeko. Gogo, are you here? She's a traditional healer, and she comes from an organization she leads called Nature Speaks and Responds. So they're working on catchment management and water systems, looking at sacred sites, and especially in Pretoria, looking around biodiversity and rivers and wetlands, and is especially working with traditional healers. So please welcome me with having the people speakers on stage. Wonderful. So I think what I'd first like to start off with personally is a little bit about my own experience of why I care about sacred sites, common ground, and environmental injustices. So I thought I would extract a couple of stories from my own personal experience. So my first experience of working on environmental injustice issues was in the informal settlements of the Cape Flats, where we were working with forced eviction of informal settlement dwellers living in flood-prone areas. And how they were engaging with the city of Cape Town. Then we moved to Mathare, which I know a lot of you work on, looking at access to green spaces along the Nairobi River catchment. And just a few days ago, I was visiting some sites in Kariobangi, which is and Korogocho, where people are trying to green initiatives, right next to the largest landfill in East Africa, Dandora. Some of my colleagues in the room are working in Dar es Salaam, where there's perennial flooding 3 months a year, where a lot of people living along the Msimbazi River Valley have constantly returned back when they get removed because they need to have access to appropriate work opportunities and livelihoods. And of course, there's always issues around industrial waste pollution and the impact of industrial contamination on human health and well-being. If we go to Tana, where other colleagues in this room are working on, there's a lot of water issues around along the siltation where people are feeding themselves. There's a lack of solid waste management and appropriate sanitation, which means every year people who are growing vegetables along the river systems are essentially consuming contaminated food. And the same story is in northern Namibia, where there's constant combination of flash floods and drought, and people who are marginalized pastoral communities who are increasingly being kind of marginalized due to privatization and globalization and land occupation and all the persistence that continues in a post-apartheid context, are really struggling with drought because of their livestock not being able to get access to fodder. So these are stories that are all happening now, and environmental justice and climate justice is a significant concern. And it's really exciting to be part of a panel who's really actively working on this in many ways. So I thought we could start with rather than being, thinking of a story of hope. So maybe I'd like to open the floor to you to ask, could you give something like one example where you're seeing a community-based initiative where people are really trying to work with restoration efforts or resistant efforts to try and access ecological and sacred sites?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for welcoming me onto this platform. As a traditional healer in the country, I think we are primarily the unwanted black sheep of the South African family. We have been largely marginalized as healers, especially when we're talking about anything to do with the environment, which surprises me a lot because everything that we touch and use is environment-based. We use trees, we use plants, we use animals, we use mountains, we use rivers, we use everything that is natural we happen to use. And I believe we should be the first people to be consulted in such issues. So I'm very grateful to be here. That's the first one. And secondly, as a traditional healer, I started an organization called Nature Speaks in Response, which tackles conservation from a traditional healer's perspective, which means I'm looking after the interest of traditional healers while I'm looking after the environment at the same time, because the environment is my office. That's where I work. Everything I need, I find there. And we have been able to do citizen science awareness workshops with traditional healers in various local municipalities thus far in aquatic spaces, where we are teaching healers how to clean their spaces, how to look after themselves, how to look after their own environment, basically, and not leave debris behind, and to make sure that you know how the water is and things like that. So this is one positive thing that we are really trying to do and are achieving quite a lot, which is great.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Taba?
No, thanks very much, Jessica, and greetings to the fellow panelist members and the audience. From COJ's point of view, there's a number of initiatives that are there that are trying to preserve the spaces. And I was pleased to see that in terms of your program, some of the sites that you intend to be visiting were working in that particular space. We have water warriors in Alexander whom have actually identified a crisis around the urban spaces to say that it's been polluted, the trees have been taken down, there's a lot of littering taking place, the parks are not well kept, and they themselves as a community, they decided as to how they can go about taking over that particular space. And the beauty of it is that we have been, as the city, in terms of planting trees in some of those spaces, but communities tend to remove them. But in this time around, you find that they themselves have put upon themselves to say, we'll look after the space, and they are now no longer removing any of the infrastructure that it's there. So you will also be noticing as well when you're doing the deep sloot area, on the memorial side, the examples that you've listed from Argentina, for instance, you will see vast amounts of lands where people are farming spinach, which is more or less for them, as much as they are coming from impoverished communities, they're trying to generate some kind of income through the spaces that they have found. So those are some of the community initiatives that from our end we can bring to the fore to say that if collaboration is people-centered, it's about what the people require. You will then realize what you intend to achieve, especially from urban management around the spaces.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're working from water management and then thinking about ownership and about kind of building awareness about the rationale behind a project and really having meaningful partnerships. What about in Zimbabwe?
Okay, so first of all, I chose my seat very strategically because the art that we use complements everyone else. So I'll explain that later. But in terms of what we've been doing, as House of Arts, we noticed that we target young people, and many of us, we don't really do well with lectures. So we write upon the power of art. So using that, we have managed to create safe and creative spaces for young people to engage in dialogue on pertinent issues, including climate action. So we have programs like House of Arts Festival, where we strategically conduct them in informal settlements and target young people that are mainly marginalized for such spaces and such dialogues, and then use the power of art and even the artists to use their voices and various performances to share conversations and initiatives they are doing using art for positive community change. So far, under the Youth City project we are currently implementing, we managed to carry out a House of Arts Festival in Bare, and we also matched that with tree planting. And we also noted that the local authorities, they are quite flexible to come to us when we say we have a festival, that may be a community engagement meeting. So in this case, we're able to invite even the deputy ministers to come and see what the young people are doing, and then participate in tree planting and everything. So we have really seen the power of art in terms of bringing everyone together and have a relaxed tone where we can both converse in a relaxed manner without attacking each other.
Absolutely.
But I'll save that for later. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly we could feel how art this morning brought a very relaxed atmosphere.
Exactly.
And my family is a family of artists, and as a
Okay.
scientist, I'm constantly saying there's not too much of a difference between the two. Regina, you've got 30 years of experience. Tell us about your experience in Kenya.
Thank you. And actually, some of the experience I would reflect on is stuff that you might have seen on your trips to Nairobi recently. You mentioned Mathare, Dandora, Korogosha, and all those areas. So Nairobi is the green city in the sun, and used to be the green city in the sun because of where it was located, a site of where waters met, a lush green. But the green city in the sun seems to be a bit of a dream nowadays because even middle-class areas are being replaced by concrete. So the green is often found in more upper-class areas where they've still been able to maintain the lush greenery, the grass, the trees, and that sort of thing. So other communities that from the beginning have been marginalized and completed and the green depleted, for me, have actually become the sites of hope because in that you find lots of groups, usually youth groups, sometimes women's groups, but sometimes mixed groups, are pushing back against this. So reclaiming the spaces, whether it is informal settlements or abandoned riverside or dump sites, to then also create their own oases of green. So they are creating eco schools, they have urban farming going on, they have public spaces going on. They're even using planting trees as memorialization. So not just trees for the basic functions that we need, oxygen, shade, and everything else, but because these are the spaces where you have injustices like extrajudicial killing, disappearances, and all the things that you can imagine. So for every soul lost, we plant a tree, and that starts to build a forest that is not just a forest, but a forest of memorialization. So for us as KDI, we've worked with a lot of these groups and collectives, starting in Kibera, which is one of the largest informal settlements in Kenya, but probably also in Africa as well. Through the Kibera Public Space Project, which is a flagship project, we've worked with these groups to co-design, co-construct public spaces that combine a bunch of functions that then support the community. So they become sites of activity for social organizing, for economic empowerment, because that is built into the design. They run the spaces themselves. They are sites of flood remediation, greening. The first green street in Kibera was done with some of these community groups. So for me, it provides a lot of hope and pushback. And I dare say that while the rest of the city doesn't feel the value of maintaining the green space and are focusing on concrete, these might be the guys that actually save the city and return it to the green city in the sun.
Yes. Fantastic. And I know there's a lot of people in the room who also work in Nairobi and doing tree planting alongside you. So it's really wonderful, the example that your city is giving. What about from Tunisia? What is your experience in North Africa?
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to say I'm really honored to be here today and to share with you a Tunisian experience about how we fight against climate change and we try to protect environment in my country. And after, first I would say, forgive my mistake in English, as it's my third language, so you can imagine how it's difficult for me to switch from another language to other. And as my brother said today, my English is dangerous, really. I want to share with you an example of lead-resistant example of local community in my country. It's actually about the unique coastal oasis in the world. It's in my country, in Gabes, and actually it's a local region who it suffers from poverty, and then there is an investor who proposed to local community to create industrial zone in this place and to create employment in the country. And this project can impact the oasis. So local community fight against this project, and they were mobilized, civil society and local inhabitants of the region to stop this process and to conserve the oasis in my country. And actually, you can find now the palm and three level of plantation, vegetable, I don't know. Anyway, there is three level of palm, then fruits, vegetable, and it's like offer an opportunity for a local community to use this different culture for food in Gibbs.
It's great that you're giving us examples from dryland contexts, because I think the discussion is often around more tropical regions on our continent. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, if FAO is trying to work on this in terms of really building case studies of how this can work in a more arid context. So this multi-story cropping and this agroforestry system you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Great. So I thought I would. Now that we've thought about these moments of hope, I guess we need to understand the rationale behind why these initiatives exist. So could I go back to Regina? Could you tell us a little bit about some of these persistent kind of environmental or climate injustices that are really manifesting in our African cities, and maybe how climate change kind of impacts different demographic or racial or ethnic or age or class groups in different ways? Okay.
So in our context, a lot of it is also historical. We all know about our colonial history. So in the way our colonial history manifested itself is that the way the city developed, the lush, green, more suitable areas were preserved for the white settlers, the European settlers, and then the other areas, either you had reserves or areas for the natives to live in. And if I take the example of Kibera, where we've done a lot of work for the last 20 years, Kibera initially was a camp from soldiers brought from South Sudan to fight for the King Armed Rifles, KAR. And they would be deployed, stationed there for a while, and then deployed to Burma, to Second World War, to Tanzania, wherever else they went in. And the word Kibra actually means forest in the Nubian language. So that's where they came. They brought their families and they settled there. It was swampy. It's next to the river, mosquitoes and everything. So once you get into post-colonialism, then we have maintained the same bad manners and bad practices of the colonial era. So when it comes to spatial planning, access to infrastructure like water, sanitation, access to green spaces, that has been maintained throughout. What that eventually evolves into is that even when we think about developing these particular areas, the response is always a concrete response. It's let's get rid of the informality, let's get rid of the informal settlements, and let's create informality, but in concrete that goes up. So what that means is that, first of all, the physical location of a lot of these spaces makes them very vulnerable when you have climate change events. Flooding, right now it's raining in Nairobi, and we are sitting on edge because we don't know if our partners are going to be affected. Last year when there was rain, then a lot of them were affected by the flooding. Houses were swept, people were swept, and it keeps happening. In addition to that, the government then sees an opportunity to reclaim land using flooding as an opportunity to save lives. So using flooding as an opportunity to get rid of people. So people have been traumatized by flooding, and then the next thing you know, evictions are happening. So that is triple, quadruple, victimization and violation that keeps happening. So it keeps repeating. And so you have lack of infrastructure, you have unsure tenure, uncertain land tenure. You already experience the extremities of climate change effects, etc., have you. And then the response of government is also not very helpful. But even when community comes together and decides, okay, we're not going to wait for government to sort us out, so we've talked about these collectives and these groups, they are part of those that are affected by the demolition because of the flooding to save lives. So they didn't just demolish houses that were at risk, but even areas where there was no risk, people's houses, hospitals, schools, community spaces were demolished. In Kibera right now, there's been no demolition as such, but we have been put on notice, and they have been on notice from last year. So there's an uncertainty that you can't develop anything, you can't do anything. The projects that were providing a little bit of livelihood, a little bit of social cohesion, a little bit of something are also disappeared, are also at risk. So we see that injustice is just continuous, but what I like is that people continuously also push back, organize, re-strategize, but also engage professionals and experts in those spaces to help them with the fight.
So a lot of the conversation, and I know people in the room write about the role of youth in kind of pushing back and thinking about alternative livelihoods. And Natasha, I know you work with youth and think about what opportunities, entrepreneurships opportunities can be accessed through the use of urban forests. Can you tell us a bit about your approach to that?
Okay, Jessica. So the issue is, currently in Africa, we cannot overemphasize the issue of diverse sources of livelihood, and urban forest presents a very big potential and opportunity for us to really explore in relation to that. And us as young people, we are mostly affected because the education that we are taught, or the graduation and everything, is no longer applicable to some of the situations. So here comes the urban forestry trying to actually accommodate us. So us as young people, we can actually explore in terms of the innovative power that we have, like the technology that we can really ride on in terms of tracking the urban forest, and including in terms of the information that we can share in terms of there are people that are talking about data. We can actually come in and help and assist on that. And also in the urban forests themselves, we can actually come up with green belts that we maintain as young people, but not only with the eyesight on providing the urban forest or the aesthetic value, improving the aesthetic value of the place, but also matching into the food production, as well as what you call this, women and youth empowerment. Yeah. So there comes into place issues of we are talking about organic care these days, skin care, that is organic food and everything. We can then incorporate that in our forest, the urban forest that we are pushing for, and then as young people take lead. So, like, for example, we can then repurpose a place and advocate for it, and then in that space, the urban forest that we then, the trees that we then plant will not just look at the tree, the number of trees that we're planting, but also then what then it then means for the people close by as well as the young people. How can we generate income from the forest that we're planting? So then it comes to place the issues of value addition, how we can what do you call this? My English bangles, guys, I'm really downloading them. Like, I was using English the whole day, so please bear with me. So how can we transition from just planting a mango tree to doing a mango snack and also selling or marketing that mango snack?
It's a multi-purpose.
Exactly. So we are now talking about how we can really create value from the trees as well, and see that it doesn't serve the purpose of just greening, but also fitting into other issues that are affecting us in the urban areas.
Absolutely.
That is food security, job creation, and, well, the aesthetic value, of course.
Yeah.
And also we can also look into ecotourism. And us as young people, we really pride ourselves in terms of being creative. And we can now talk about how we then package. We also be tour guides. We also plan events, and then prioritize and locate them in these recreational parks that we are maintaining. And also, I'm not a scientist, but through research, I also heard that we can also incorporate projects like beekeeping in the forest, and also that also has its value on its own, that it comes with the beeswax being sold and the honey and the medicinal purposes that honey has. And also we talk about planning events, campsites and everything.
Great.
We really need to really think big when we think about the potential urban forest has in us as young people creating jobs for ourselves, and hopefully packaging it creatively so that the ministers, when we come, like, for example, what she was sharing, we can then use art at the forefront to then come in and maybe use a film or drama.
Okay. Great.
To really package the information and then cascade to the rest of the people that we see have the potential from gaining from this urban forest.
Yeah, there's lots to learn from that. So you talked about food security, and I think something that often when people talk about economically valuable trees, they talk about fruit trees, which I think is important, but I think the conversation needs to go beyond that. And there's also sometimes difficulties in security and monitoring of those trees, and having all these co-benefits and how we get that the product to market, so that you're thinking about the whole supply chain. So that's, and giving examples and communicating that, and building technical skills. Out of curiosity, can you put your hand up if you're working on livelihoods in urban forests? If you're in the audience, we've got at least about 25, 30 institutions here working on livelihoods in urban forests in the room. And if you're working on youth, can you put your hand up? Wow, a big group working on youth. We can all put our hands up. Okay, great. So yes, you talked about something that was more about, how do we tap into the capitalist system, and we, think about these tangible goods. What about the intangible goods? So Gogo, I know you work with traditional healers, and you're trying to think about catchment management. So how do we involve people who are like traditional healers in kind of accessing these sacred sites and reducing these injustices?
Thank you very much for the question. I think we need to reimagine, from a traditional healer's perspective, urban forests. Instead of just planting trees for the sake of planting trees, what we are trying to do is start medicinal gardens in every local municipality. But in our case, it's not just for harvesting. It's going to be medicinal gardens that are going to be replanted back into the environment so that we revive it. Because it's all good and well to be planting trees for shade, but for us, there's a spiritual component to it. And the spiritual component ties in very nicely with our sacred sites, because we have them in urban areas. We have in our country about 70% of the people using traditional healers at one point or another. And in Johannesburg at the moment, unofficially, there's over 200,000 of us. And with that large number, it means that we infiltrate each and every part of our urban spaces. There is no township and these days towns, you can go to where you don't find a traditional healer. So we are there. And because we are there and in urban spaces, we create these sacred sites from the natural environment that we find around us, from the rivers to springs to trees to everything else. And we want to add the medicinal gardens as sacred sites for us as well, so that our twasas or initiates can also be able to learn from that. And in order for us to do those medicinal gardens, we need to go down to the grassroots, to the communities, where we are going to ask the communities to find medicines that are found in that particular area, not just in general, found everywhere, but in a particular area, so that we revive the ecosystem in that area and we make sure that traditional healers are playing a very vital role in protecting our medicines, in protecting our sacred spaces, which could generally be everything. Everything that you find that's natural can be translated into a sacred space. And it's our duty as traditional healers, as custodians of indigenous knowledge, to try and pass it on, to make sure that we preserve it for future generations, to make sure that our children, our children's children, find what we found. Because the truth of the matter is, indigenous knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation. And the fact that we can find the trees and plants that we find today, it means that they were doing something right. Somebody was doing something right in our communities, and our forefathers were doing something right. It's about time we went back and started tapping into that knowledge, and to make sure that we bring it to the fore, and we make sure that we preserve it, and we make sure that we conserve it, so that even those that get initiated after us are able to then take that information forward. We are able to heal our communities as we are healing them at the moment. And as I'm saying, the number of traditional healers is growing on a daily basis. And by the time 20 years goes down the line, some of the medicines that we find now, we might not find anymore if we do not take heed and if we don't stand up and teach each other how to harvest sustainably, how to propagate, how to plant ourselves, how to start these nurseries, how to maintain these nurseries. And I believe it's our duty as traditional healers to take that gauntlet and take it forward, which is why we're here and which is why I'm here, which is why I'm working with every single traditional healer out there to be able to do that. I am lucky enough to have been able to do, to work with local communities from Alexandra, Soweto, the whole of Johannesburg basically, as well as in Pretoria at the moment. But because of lack of funding, we have not been able to go to other provinces, but we're working very hard to get to that point. And we will reach each and every one of the traditional healers out there, because they need to start taking part. They need to start taking responsibility for their offices, for nature, and for what their ancestors have left behind for them. Thokozani.
Thank you. What you're saying is really, really important. I think, we often approach the problem of urban forests from a very technocratic perspective, and we don't think about, the kind of a systemic approach, and also we have lots of discussions about ecosystem services, but the values that really, are inculcated into society that will ensure that we have this respect for our environment and our connection to it. And I do think our continent is unique in the sense of that we have a much stronger connection, like evidence is shown from review studies to show that we really do have, our connection to the land is much more significant in terms of our motivation for management. But we need to still bring this into our governance structures and into our education system. And we're losing the knowledge extremely fast. And with there's so much money that's being wasted, millions of dollars that are being invested into reforestation projects because people are not managing them properly, and there's lack of survival rates. And I think the knowledge that you have in terms of building and transferring these nurseries and managing the soil appropriately is really important. And of course, incorporating the traditional authorities into decision-making processes in a meaningful way, and healers. So I think it's really a good kind of segue into, from the city of Johannesburg's perspective, and we have these, win-win scenarios that are kind of being discussed at the moment. But of course, we know as a position of leadership, there's all these trade-offs, and people have multiple demands in a very complex system like Johannesburg. Can you speak to that a little bit about your work in, for example, Alexandra, or the projects in terms of how to manage different priorities?
No, thanks very much for that question. I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that the city of Johannesburg has one of the biggest man-made urban forestry Second to that is that some of yourselves, as you were driving through the N1 coming here, and some of yourselves, you went through to Mall of Africa for shopping. Some of yourselves may not be aware that back in the days, Alexander was just a mere farm. But today, you look at it, it's all corrugated iron. You look at the place where Mall of Africa, it used to be an open space which natures some of the activities that GoGo would definitely be undertaking. Today, it's occupied by what my colleague here would refer to as concrete structures. So, second to that, you have a city which is a cosmopolitan city, but it's a city of a migrant wherein people are coming in for economic opportunities and for better livelihoods. So when you have that kind of a city, people will tend to compete for the available space that is there. So coming back to Alexander, it being a farm, subdivided, few houses now being put up, informality that starting up. If you look at the pictures, it used to have some bit of greenery in it. Today, it's completely covered with steel material, simply because people are competing for the smaller spaces for them to occupy in terms of housing. And added to that, you are supposed to also be providing amenities for people, for them to enjoy. But also, as you do that, there must also be other industrial activities that must take place. All of that, they are competing in a city that is quite small, because the city of Johannesburg is one of the smallest metropolitan cities that you can find in South Africa. So in that space, what then happens is that those with the financial muscle and the power for development, they would want to actually occupy the space, turn it in the manner that they would want to turn it at. But from our end, as COJ recently, the executive mayor identified one of the most important pillars. He said to us, go and identify officials, 100 landfill sites or dumping sites that are there, that you can turn around and make them into greenery spaces. You can turn them into a park, you can turn them into what do you call a vegetable garden, but make it a livable space that people can then occupy. Interesting enough is that recently as well, there's been initiatives with Sankasa wherein we partnered with them specifically for Alexander, wherein about 3,000 plants, they intend to be planted in that particular space to create some bit of greenery. But the fundamental question that I grappled with as I was coming here as well and engaging with the team in the office was, what kind of an informal settlement do we envision from a greenery point of view? Because when you look at the look of our informal settlements all over, not necessarily about city of Johannesburg, you look at Cape Town as well, Kaelicha for an example. It lacks that component of greenery, which would then support the activities of what GoGo would be undertaking.
Unequal access to green space.
So, and then the next question would then be, why should it then be that all these other activities that involve some element of greenery have to be done at the river banks, at the periphery of the city most of the time? And interesting enough, even the picture that we are projecting here behind our back, it's actually coming from a very affluent area. Very few places that you can find that are looking like this that have got informality in it. So I think as architects of the cities that are seated here, we need to start thinking differently to say, how do we support the demands of human settlement with urban spaces that are required for amenities?
Great.
How do we support that from the point of spaces wherein our colleagues will then find medicines that would help us, which is an indigenous knowledge that we've been sitting with for years to come. And some of these particular items that are being utilized from development point of view, you will rarely find developers coming through from a city point of view saying, you know what, I'm intending to plant X amount of trees of this nature because, one, if somebody has got flu, they can quickly go and pick up that, boil the leaves and drink.
Yeah, okay.
We use trees that offer us some kind of a nice picture when we stand next to them, but not necessarily looking from our livelihoods to say,
Yeah.
or even from our health, how would they support us in the near future, or if there's anyone in that urbanized space that practices what Gogo is doing,
Yeah.
how would they tap into that particular space? So it's a very delicate balance that cities are grappling with.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that there is consciousness around it, because you played the video of our former executive mayor who made a deliberate decision about Soweto to say, I'm going to plant trees in Soweto.
Okay.
Today, that legacy, it shows you that Soweto is becoming much more greener, which was a former mine area as well, being affected by the mines. So, but it's becoming green, and the air pollution that is there, it's also being dealt with from that point of view.
Amazing. So I think, yeah, you really touched on a lot of things there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Buffelsdraai landfill site. They've done some reforestation initiatives up on top of that. That might be very useful. And I know, for another example you might draw from is in Freetown. There's in the Cockle Bay, they've also built on top of a landfill. But of course, you do have to think about the health implications of that. Out of curiosity, are you a landscape architect? Can you put your hand up in the room? So you should talk to these people. And if you're a town planner or an urban planner, can you put your hands up? Great. So people who really have a lot of expertise in thinking about how you have, and you know, there's the just green enough approach, and I think that's what you were talking about. I'm really glad that you highlighted that this is probably not necessarily what an African city is necessarily what we're always envisioning. It's a good one, but it is, you know, it doesn't show a diversity of livelihoods or income strata within the landscape. It's a beautiful picture, though. So I think this segues, like, you know, this idea of co-production and participation, and ensuring that we have an appropriate legislative environment. And I know as a lawyer you've been thinking about this, Ishrat. So can you tell us a little bit about, like in North Africa, how does the legislative environment allow for kind of appropriate participation?
Yeah. Thank you. I will give you an idea about environmental framework, legal framework in my country, but I would like to give you an idea about the situation of climate change and the impact of climate change in North Africa. Actually, all of us know that the impact of climate change is global, but it affects North Africa with severe impacts. North Africa is in the Mediterranean region, but it's more impacted about the effect of climate change, even more other developing countries, European countries, in the other side of Mediterranean region. We are facing undeniable facts like water scarcity, high level of warming, and there is impact on agriculture, on weather, and that impacts really health of people with different age and with different categories. And actually, this is in the all North Africa region. In Tunisia, I will give you some example of the impact of climate change. In my country, successive heat waves in the southern region of Tunisia, the temperature remains almost 50 degrees for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, you can imagine the impact in our life, in social life and economic life. We also, for example, I will give you a simple example. If global warming reaches 5 degrees in other countries in the globe, it can affect also, it can reach 8 degrees in Tunisia and Algeria. And it's almost the double of the impact in other regions. So Tunisia proposed a legal framework to fight against climate change and to protect environment. Tunisia have a strong legal framework in environmental law. We our constitution stipulate the right environment and sustainable development as a human right. And then we have also a forest code, water resources code, and we have a draft of code of environmental law and a draft of climate law also. And in the political level, we have NDC that consider forest and urban like main point of our NDC, and we have a lot of strategy that aims to conserve environment and to protect climate in my country. We have like strategy about reforestation and protection of environment in different
It sounds like a very supportive legislative context.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think we can learn from that. There's a lot of cities that are advancing it, but I think that a lot of these policies are quite nascent, and we have a lot of work. I think South Africa is doing pretty well. It sounds like Tunisia is doing very well. Maybe Kenya is doing well, and Lilongwe and Kigali. But we've got a long way to go. Okay, so I think we just have a few minutes left, and I thought it would be nice for you in the audience to turn to the person next to you, maybe give your insights, and just to talk to one another. And I'd like to pose the question of, this is a session on sacred ground, a common future, and thinking about environmental injustice and how we overcome colonial and racial legacies from the past. So what is your hope of how we build, inspire, and develop skill sets for the future to have new change makers to make a more equitable future? Anything goes. It's a big question, but think of, and then we're going to get one word from the panel, but turn to the person next to you for a second. So, just get like one word, one sentence.
1 minute.
One sentence.
1 minute. One sentence. Okay.
I think that's our time. We've got so much more to speak about.
Just one sentence each.
She said one word, but I guess it's a sentence. So I'll cut it short, not too long.
One sentence.
I'm sure people come and talk to you afterwards. I'm sure people will come and talk to you afterwards as well. Especially, like, I wish... Can I close with a prayer? Do you think there's any, like... Okay. But I'm just going to give you, if you have something really, really powerful to say in one sentence, put your hand up. Bamenda, can you speak out loud? Okay, one sentence.
Yes, one sentence is that what the take-home is when you have a secret forest, it should be protected by law, especially considering that some of those forests now have medicinal plants which are life-saving.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other important points? Yes. Stand up, project.
So what we came up with was youth should be at the forefront of gaining skills like GIS and remote sensing, relocation of trees planted, and growing of nurseries.
Wonderful, thank you. Youth involvement. Zimbabwe? Yes. Loud. One sentence.
It's
a statement. The questions come later. Yes? Livelihoods are important, yes. Abba. Informal settlements, gender and municipal in partnerships. At the back. We need to understand the benefits of the forest. And education.
Passionate.
And be passionate about it. Absolutely. Passion is important. Okay. If there's mics, please take the mics. Yes, over there.
Talking about sacred ground, are we afraid to talk about our cemeteries?
Could you repeat that, please?
Cemeteries.
Yes.
Cemeteries.
Yeah.
The cemeteries are very important, especially in my home city, Windhoek. Yes.
The school curriculum should suggest that it be used.
School curriculum are very important. We need to revise school curriculum. Addis.
The power of collaboration.
Power of collaboration. And last, next to Joy. Left.
Thank you very much. And just to add on the part of the school curriculum, in most cases when we talk about the school curriculum, we concentrate on having to involve the primary schools and high schools and tertiary, but forgetting these little ones, right from the creche. You look at them, they are playing around, they have a lot of field, but what about involving them right from that early age?
Absolutely.
You know,
Early childhood
as soon
development.
as we say that this is what you can live on, I'm honestly thinking that we can inculcate into them the passion.
The passion and the value from a young age. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to give one sentence to each of our panelists, and we'll close the session. So maybe starting with North Africa. One sentence.
Thank you, Jessica. Actually, I would like to say that environmental protection and greening cities is a shared and common responsibility of all of us. And I would like to say that it's the responsibility of different stakeholders, but especially we need to involve local communities in decision making and to valorize or highlight the know-how of each locality. And this forum and our exchange is really a great experience, but we have to continue this process.
Thank you. Participation and collaboration.
Thank you. I was inspired by what Tolu said in the morning, aspire, inspire, conspire. So I think we need to aspire that the world is going to be a better place and any space we live in can be a better place. And take the inspiration of those in unlikely spaces, like informal settlements, that if it's possible, that it's possible anywhere, because those are the most difficult and complex situations. But also conspire with each other, conspire sometimes with government, and conspire with other unlikely actors that can make the dream come true. So I think it would be critical to then have things like intergenerational dialogues, create those spaces where we can learn from each other across disciplines, across ages, etc.
Wonderful.
Creative spaces, right?
Including.
Okay. My one sentence is, let us fully exploit the power of art in unpacking our issues, imagining and shaping a better future together and planning together. Artists are key in policy making and also shaping a better future for all.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
No, thanks very much. From myself is that a people-centered approach will make us realize what we desire and for preservation of our environment for the future generation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My sentence is broken into two. The first part of my sentence says, we need to look at the elephant in the room, which is the fact that townships are used as dumping sites since colonial times. Our rivers have got sewage running in them, but it's only in townships. We have a reputation that black people are dirty. That's not true. Our municipalities throw dirt into our rivers. And as a healer, I use that river. I need that river to be clean. It needs to be sacred. I need to be able to use it, so that needs to change. The second part of my sentence is policies.
It's a good sentence.
Policies, the second part, it's a long sentence. The second part of my sentence is policies. The policies on conservation in our country were never written for us, by us. They were written to tell us what to do without including our voices, without asking us what it is we want. We need to redefine conservation to suit the man on the ground and to suit us.
Yes.
So they all need to be revised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. Well, thank you for creating such a warm, welcoming community. I hope that we can all continue to have kind of this open discussion. We all come from different places. We all are different races. We all are different nationalities. And I'm so grateful to be part of this welcoming, open community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, and all the panelists. Big round of applause again to the panelists. Do I get a sentence? We have learned that urban forestry is not only a technical challenge, it is also a social justice. It's a matter of social justice. And we must reflect on our historical patterns, but at the same time, respect cultural aspects and the attachment that we have with urban forestry. With that, I'd like to thank you. You can as well leave the podium. I know that we have lots of questions to our speakers, to our keynote presenters. I would like to encourage you to engage with them during the breakouts, during lunch hour, as we don't have enough time to discuss that. I was going to wrap up, but everyone did a fantastic job just giving the key messages that were coming out from this roundtable. So I have a few announcements before we go to the next session. As this is also the last time that you will see me on this podium, I hope you will miss me as the same way I think I'm under 30. But so as we're going to the next segment, I'd like to remind you that we do have parallel sessions. They will be projected here, and you're free as well to move to any of the parallel sessions. We also have side events and poster presentations. We have a colleague from the Witwatersrand University. They are doing a study together with the city of Johannesburg on mapping public spaces and green areas, but also looking at climate finance. They are doing a survey, and they're just going to be outside the door. If you have time, please speak to them. They will be able to give you a guidance on how you can contribute to the survey that they currently have. Another thing is that today's cocktail was supposed to be a women's-only cocktail. But we were reminded yesterday by the mayor of Banjul that we as women, we carry everyone. So we want also all the men that are coming to this cocktail to understand the challenges that women have. So you're all welcome. Yes, you're all welcome. And we did a head count, but if there's anyone else who did not raise their hand during the morning session when I asked, please also let the organizers know that you'll be joining the cocktail. Last but not least, remember we have the study tours. I was reminded that that is going to happen on Friday, the 4th day. Please remember to register yourself to the right site visits. And with that, I was your chair for the day, and I'm really looking forward to engaging with you during the cocktails. Thank you very much. Good, thank you.